14. Nazis. I couldn't believe it. Professor David Palmer of Weldon University, winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics. The news didn't lie. It was that time of year when every day of the week the news announces the winners in another category. You know, they announce the names, you don't pay any attention. You just wait for the next story. Unless, that is, you know one of the names. Unless you used to sit next to the guy whose name they are announcing, his name called right after yours and roll each morning. There was a small picture of him, Dr. David Palmer, beside the other winners. He looked older. We all do, but it was him. He had this big old smile. Dave always had a big smile. Didn't always know where it came from, but it was to his credit. I smiled too, standing there in the kitchen drinking my coffee with a big helping of shock and disbelief. David had lived in this town, in the neighborhood by the grocery store where I still shopped. Now he was a world-famous figure, and I had taught him how to throw a football. I looked at his picture. It was definitely him. In the years since, he had gotten a little better at presenting himself. His hair was neatly parted, and he sported a scholarly beard. He had been ugly in junior high, with his stretched-out lips and rounded cheeks. At first glance, he looked like he suffered from Down syndrome. He also had bad dandruff and scaly red skin that was always breaking out in a rash, a reaction to something or other. The girls used to recoil at him and pinch their noses behind his back. His feet pointed outwards, so when he walked he bent over and breathed hard through his mouth. I wondered if he had used that same duck walk when he'd crossed the stage to receive his prize. He used to say things like, "Top of the morning, Sidney," and "Good day, young chap," and called me Laddie. He reminded me of my grandfather. Dave loved history and engineering. No one doubted that he was smart, but no one would ever have traded their looks for his smarts. He loved the history of warfare too, and was particularly fascinated by the German war machine. I had taken a few looks at my dad's artillery books while I was in our bathroom, so I could actually talk to Dave about these things. The bomb ended the war, Dave, but radar won it. That would be the one solitary example of the Brits getting the jump on the Krauts, I remember he had said. The Brits got the jump on a lot of things. The British did invent the first aircraft carrier, but the Germans invented the first jet plane, the Heinkel HE-178, predecessor to the Messerschmitt ME-262. Well, if the Germans hadn't had their gadgets, they would have lost the war in a month. Dave looked at me aghast. His heels came together, and he poked at the air with his finger, which meant he was quoting someone important. The Germans institutionalized military excellence. For every one excellent general on the Allied side, the Germans had 10. General Eisenhower, 1946. Well, I guess that settles it. I changed schools after 6th grade, so in 7th grade I was the new kid. My parents wanted me in a smaller, private school. They could still afford things like that then. Dad was still working his job in finance. It was a real small Catholic school, only 2 classes per grade. Real cliquish. The kids who had been there the longest were like the ruling class. They were the cool ones. I was a nerd because I was new. You could see the segregation between the cool group and nerds at recess. The cool guys played football on the back field. The nerds didn't. We just played catch near the school building. My friends were Pablo and Jeff. They were nerds too. Jeff because he wore Metallica t-shirts, and Pablo because he was poor and wore the same clothes every day. But Jeff and Pablo never considered themselves as nerdy as Dave. Even nerds have a strange kind of hierarchy, I guess. No one wanted to be associated with Dave. He was always raising his hand in class and providing these long-winded answers that even the teachers got tired of. But nothing could dampen Dave's enthusiasm for learning. Yeah, big nerd, but no surprise about the Nobel, I guess. At recess, Dave would follow me around the playground. I acted like I didn't know he was there, but he was persistent as a shadow. When I would come up to Jeff and Pablo to toss the football, they'd inevitably look behind me and say, "Dave, you sit over there and watch." So Dave would sit on the curb watching us throw. As we played, Jeff and Pablo would slowly move away so that by the time recess was over, we'd be on the opposite side of the field from Dave. He'd sometimes still be sitting there like we told him to. One day, both Jeff and Pablo were absent from school. I had no one to throw with, so I turned around, facing Dave, and tossed the football. It hit him in the shoulder and fell to the ground at his feet, where it sat rocking. He stood staring at me through his watery glasses. "You dropped your football, laddie," he said. "No, you dropped it. I threw it to you. I'm teaching you how to throw." "Oh, splendid!" Dave was not very coordinated or strong. His fingers were short and fat. Academic fingers, I suppose. I don't think he ever actually threw a tight spiral, but he could flub that ball pretty well. Pablo and Jeff were not thrilled when I said Dave could throw with us the next day. Dave couldn't catch to save his life. He'd close his eyes, and the ball would hit him in the chest, bounce past his fingers, and Jeff or Pablo would grab it. They begrudged me his presence. Every day they would run and hide from him behind the dumpster, but Dave would always find us, and we'd emerge to pass the ball. It was a weird little ritual they insisted on. It was over Christmas break that I lost my eye. I came back after an extra week out with a patch. 7th grade is not a good time to be different. For a while, it was like people felt sorry for me and didn't say anything. But it didn't take long for the teasing to begin. Mostly pirate jokes. I've heard so many stupid pirate jokes. It was Chris Solaris who was the first to start making jokes about it in the cafeteria. Started doing this loud pirate imitation. I ignored it, as if it wasn't happening. I wanted to believe it wasn't directed at me. If I pretended hard enough, I could almost convince myself it wasn't. I was still new to it. Later, I would have throttled him, but then I just felt vulnerable and raw. Jeff and Pablo were useless that day. They were not going to challenge Chris Solaris. He was a clown, but he had been at the school since kindergarten. Like I said, he was part of the ruling class. I don't know what it was that Dave caught on to that day. Maybe it was because he was used to being teased. Maybe it was because I had taught him to throw the football. But he piped up and said in his loud, nasal voice so the whole cafeteria could hear, "Chris Solaris, you should be ashamed of yourself. Some of the most famous people in history have had one eye, including Hannibal, who was one of the greatest military leaders of all time. Not to mention Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first dictionary of the English language. Theodore Roosevelt was blinded in one eye during a boxing match. Not to mention my personal favorite, Horatius Cocles, who single-handedly defended Rome on the bridge over the river Tiber when the Etruscans attacked, all with an arrow sticking in his eye socket. Mr. Solaris, you could only wish to be in such rarefied company as that." Dave's outburst effectively shifted the attention away from me, so I guess that was good. Still, to say I was mortified would be an understatement. I didn't want Dave coming to my rescue, and I didn't need people thinking we were best friends. I just got up and ran to the boys' bathroom, where I cried. It was weird. I could still cry out of both eye sockets, but only see out of one. Had to pull off my patch so it wouldn't get ruined. Right before spring break, we were doing the yearbook's last will and testament section. You know, the part where you bequeath things to the lower classes. Jeff left all his gym socks to the kindergarten kids. Pablo wrote something obscene in Spanish. I wrote, "I leave all the phone numbers on the bathroom walls to anyone lonely enough to call them." The editors wouldn't put mine in the yearbook, but they approved Pablo's and Jeff's. I don't think they spoke Spanish. Dave's was also accepted. He wrote, "I leave all my books to Sidney. Better get a bookcase, laddie." The class thought this was hilarious. Rick Davies left me a hammer and nails so I could build a bookcase. Chris Solaris left me wood for the shelves. Brad Cavaney, who was the coolest kid in school, he already had to shave in just 7th grade, started calling me laddie whenever he saw me. This made my ears burn and my armpits itch with perspiration. I got in trouble for poking holes in my spelling book, breaking a red pen over them and spreading the ink around so that it looked like blood. That, combined with the fact I finally punched Chris Solaris in the face, meant I lost recess privileges. But it was worse than that. I guess they were afraid I was homicidal or something. I had to sit in the counselor's office for observation during recess for a week. On the second day, Dave walked in. I realized he had come looking for me. "Sidney, my good man, what ails you?" "Nothing ails me." "Why are you in the counselor's office?" "Because I'm disturbed." "Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time, for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse," he said, with a grand sweep of his hand. He looked down at me. I knew he was quoting, but I had no idea what. He took pity on me. T.S. Eliot, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. "That's great. One of my favorites." "Mine too. Mind if I join you, laddie?" "By all means," I said, copying his sweeping hand motion as I gestured at the chair across from me. He snorted and smiled, then sat down. "Pablo and Jeff are off smoking behind the dumpster. They said they aren't going to throw the ball until you come back." I figured they were likely throwing it now that he was gone. "I'll be back next week." "Oh my!" Dave looked around, his eyes landing on a box of checkers. When he opened it, we could see a bunch of chess pieces rolling around too. "Fancy a game of chess?" "Why not?" Dave decimated me, every game. But that was all right. I learned a lot of strategies and combinations from him. He was real patient with me too. I kept knocking over the pieces when I reached for them. I was still new to having one eye and had not recalibrated my sense of depth. Dave wasn't fazed. He knew what was up. He'd just keep talking about Germans or the Greeks or British poetry without missing a beat and set the pieces back in place. One afternoon, a counselor who was also a nun walked by, stopped, and asked, "David, what are you doing here?" "Greetings, Sister Camilla. I'm not in trouble. I'm just keeping my friend here company." "Oh." She looked at me, likely surprised that Dave considered me a friend. We were an odd couple, I guess. She probably wanted some type of confirmation from me. I shrugged. "I taught him how to throw a football. He's teaching me how to lose at chess." Dave laughed uncontrollably. He came in every day that I had detention or observation, whatever it was. If he had been anyone else, the counselors wouldn't have allowed it. But it was Dave Palmer, and they probably thought he was a good influence on me. I was more comfortable talking to Dave in the counselor's office. None of our classmates could see us then. But I wondered if it meant he would follow me around even more. I made sure to walk ahead of him and not talk to him on the way back to the classroom each day, letting him duck walk after me like a lost puppy or something. In April, Dave had his birthday. He invited Jeff, Pablo, and me. I called his house to say I couldn't go. His mom answered, "Hi, this is Sidney. I'm Dave's friend." "Hello, Sidney. How are you?" Her voice seemed really nice. "I'm okay, but I can't make it to Dave's party. My mom says I have a fever." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." "I tell him I'm really sorry." "I will. I hope you feel better." I later found out that Jeff and Pablo didn't go either. I hoped someone had shown up, but I never asked Dave how his birthday went. One recess, Brad Cavaney came up to us and watched me throw without saying anything. I was waiting for him to start making fun of me, but he goes, "Sidney, that's a good throw." "Thanks." "We need a quarterback. You want to fill in for Chris? He got suspended." "Sure," I said. "You can't take Sidney," Dave jumped in. "We were having a stimulating conversation on the Reich's use of the machine gun at the Battle of Somme." "Reich?" "It's, German," I said, looking at my feet. My cheeks felt real hot, my armpits sweaty again. "German?" Brad said, turning. "Dave, are you a Nazi?" I chuckled a little, mostly because I was nervous, but Brad took it as encouragement. Dave's voice rose a little bit, so it got real squealy. He always started to sound like a soprano when he was flustered, like an old woman, really. No, of course not. It's just that throughout history, the Germans have been some of the best engineers in the Western world. Dave's a Nazi. Brad tapped me playfully on the shoulder. Dave's face turned red, and his big frog lips frowned. I am not a Nazi! Dave, you always talk about Germans. You have a swastika tattoo? I said, joining in. I wanted Brad to like me. I wanted to be a cool kid, I guess. I am not a Nazi! Dave stomped his foot and screamed. David is a Nazi! David is a Nazi! Brad was chanting. Dave's face bunched up and he started whimpering. It quickly changed to crying. All out bawling. He charged Brad and tried to stomp on his foot. That was as violent as Dave could get, stomping someone's foot. Brad jumped right out of the way, dancing and singing. I did this too, hopping away from Dave's stomping feet and bouncing on my toes in tune with Brad's singing. It was fun. The whole football crowd slowly came and joined the dance. Dave finally ran inside. I don't even think he could see us after a while. His face was so swollen, his eyes just pouring tears. We could hear his high-pitched whining all the way across the field. People did imitations of him for the rest of recess. My team won that day. I threw 2 touchdown passes to Brad. After that, I sat with the football guys at lunch. I never said much there, but it was cool because the girls sat on the other end of the table, and we could flirt with them. At least Brad did. The rest of us watched and said nothing. Pablo and Jeff didn't move to our table. There was some silent understanding that they were not that cool, but they would hang out near us when we picked teams for football, and I always picked them so they could play with us. Dave didn't come to school for a while. He finally came back when we had finals. He didn't come out for recess anymore. I turned the TV off. The anchorwoman had moved on from the Nobel Prize announcements anyway. I poured my coffee into the sink and dumped my toast in the trash. I wasn't hungry. I stared out the window for a while. The sun wasn't up yet. I noticed our fence needing repairing before the neighbors complained. There were dishes in the sink. I set the coffee mug on top of them and they settled with a slight clatter. There was a putrid smell of garbage coming up from the trash can. Coffee grounds, withered vegetables, and rancid milk cartons. I removed the lid and pulled up the bag to take it out. I pushed the back door open with my foot, and a blast of cold air hit me in the face. Damn it. I was a stupid kid.